Hi, welcome to Broken and Brilliant. I am Carrie O'Toole with Carrie O'Toole Ministries, and today my guest is Izidor Ruckel. Welcome, Izidor.
Thank you so much for having me here today.
You're so welcome. We met, I don't even remember how long ago, 5 or 6 years ago, maybe. And do you remember when that was?
That was right after the Washington Post article came out in 2014.
Yeah. And you just have such an interesting story, and you've overcome so much. And I have a lot of people who watch our podcast are adoptive parents and people who have just gone through really rough times and have come out on the other side. And that certainly is your story. So I just was thinking about having you on, and I would love for you to share with us a little bit about your early years and then how you got to where you're at today. Would that be all right?
Yeah, that's perfectly fine.
Okay, so share a little bit about your early years with us.
To sum it up, I grew up in a Romanian orphanage up until I was 11 years old. After that, an American family, Marlis and Daniel Ruckel, adopted me in 1991. Now, growing up in a family environment was not easy for the simple fact that a child has grown up in an institution, and from the moment they can remember, that institution is all they know, and it's kind of their home. But growing up in my teenagehood, I was very rebellious and kind of wanted to do my own things like all the other kids. And at the age of 17, I left and have been out on my own since then.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I can't say that my parents were awful parents because they weren't, I actually believe I had the most amazing parents. They did everything under their power, and I believe their faith is what helped them get through this during the struggle and the challenge times of my rebellious and adolescent.
Yeah, tell us a little bit about growing up in the orphanage. What was that like?
You have to realize that we had two kinds of lives, one during the communist time and one after. During the communist times, it was completely different for the simple fact that there weren't very many caretakers that were interested in caring for the children or providing what was in the best interest of the child. Problem was that there were too many children with very limited staffing it's really hard to provide the care that every child is required to have. Most of the time, the easiest way to deal with children was to either drug them or beat them. Now, children created development of hitting their head against the wall, started hitting themselves, and some would rock themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So they're screaming, they're hitting their heads and hitting themselves. It created a pattern to where the staffs had to put them in straitjackets, tie them to pipes, to tables, and that was to really try and keep them from hurting themselves. But some of the staffs obviously did not realize that them tying to pipes, embedding, and all these other things was actually creating a blood circulation cutoff, and then the hands will sometimes turn blue or purple. Thankfully, nobody died from them. But after communism ended, we got a new director, a new staffing, a lot of it. So these staffing had more compassion, and I think most of them that came through, I believe, were Christians as well.
Mm-hmm.
And 7 angels, I talk about them in my autobiography, Abandoned for Life. They were the most impact to really help us. There it is.
Yeah, that's Isidor's book, Abandoned for Life. I just want to make sure people can see it here. We'll put a post for it in the link as well, or a link in the description.
Okay. With these new staffing, new director, they really believed in giving children opportunity to go outside, to be educated. And as time progressed, children started to develop and their brain began to stimulate to where they could function and feel like they were somewhat humans instead of vegetation. And I remained there on the dormitory where I lived for maybe 1 year or a year and a half before I left the orphanage and came to America.
So for the first, say, 9.5 or 10 years of your life, this was under communism, and that's when the staffing was so poor. and they just had so many people and they didn't know what to do with you. So all of this was going on. And then the last year or year and a half, it was much better. Is that correct?
Correct. Correct. And I think that the other issue was that most of the children were special needs, that nobody was trained how to work with special needs. Most of the people coming to work in institutions were straight out of high school, is what we realized.
Wow. So it wasn't necessarily cruelty or intent to be cruel. It was ignorance. They just didn't know what to do.
Absolutely correct. And the government at the time had no remorse, because to the government, children were nothing but unsalvageable, inhumanable. Nobody checked up on these kids. And when the director pleaded for help for a transformation of the institution to provide better service for children, from every angle that he went to, he was rejected.
Mm. Well, and just the name of, what was the name of the institution that you were in?
It was Home Hospital for the Irrecoverable Children.
I mean, just the title of that is so, that's so inhumane.
Purpose of that title was because most of these children had special needs or disabilities, and back then disability and special needs was heavily discriminated. You could not be in public view, and if you were looked upon, and the person that was with you, for example, a worker, was questioned, why is this kid doing in the public? He's not allowed, he's an embarrassment. I had that experience going home with a worker. And today, Romania is changing dramatically, but disability discrimination is still a factor.
Yeah.
It
Well,
is
and
it's against the law to discriminate in Romania today.
oh,
There are
wow.
laws to protect it. But when you go from city to cities and people don't know you and you go to random places, that is still an issue of discrimination. I experienced that last year in Romania too.
Right. Now you've been back several times, is that correct?
I have been back 6, 7 times. My first one was when I went back with ABC News 2020, who paid my flight to Romania. They found my birth family and created a story, and then it was released in 2001, which went viral on that.
And what was that
And
called, in case people are looking for that?
it was called Children for Sale, and I was for June 8th, 2001.
Now, is this, when they say children for sale, what do they mean by that? Are we talking about child trafficking? What are we talking about?
So there are many families who were going to Romania at the time of the adoption, and most of them were so desperate to get these kids out of institutions, because most American or outer world were not used to seeing the trauma these kids were going through or how they were treated. When the birth families were found, most of them wanted something. Give me $500 and I will give you my child. I will sign the paperwork. Buy me a house and you can have that child. In 2020 went undercover and said they were interested in buying a child.
Oh,
And they
wow.
found corner after corner where parents were willing to sell children, but it wasn't an average Romanian family that you would ever find this in. Majority of this kind of work was done through the Roma communities in Romania.
For the what communities?
Roma. So they were known as gypsies, but now
Yes.
we call them Romas. They're the poorest and the most struggling, but they're the ones to offer their children up for sale. Buy me a house, give me money, and you can have him.
Wow. So what was that like for you when they found your birth family?
I had already known my mom and dad. Right before I came to America, they tried to take me out of the orphanage, but the director was scared that they were going to put me on the streets to beg, or they were going to do something to me, and he refused to allow me to leave that institution. So I got to see them maybe 2 to 3 times before I left the institution. I met a brother that I had and a sister that was just born. And after that, that was the end of my journey of ever seeing them again. Now, meeting them in 2001, it was really scary for me. What would you call it? You would go into a heavy breathing, and the questions that I had for them, one of the biggest one that I realized was that I wasn't born with a disability. Most of my life, the world sees the world as a perfect child. If you had a disability, you weren't the same. So for a long time, I was very embarrassed of my disability that I had. But through discovering my birth parents, I learned that I had actually was not born disabled. I had been infected with the disease in a regular hospital in Romania. While I went there for an illness that I had, for example, a flu or a cold, the
Mhm.
needle was dirty. 40 children were infected with polio. And out of 40, only 2 children survived, and the other 38 all passed away.
Oh, wow. So
Yeah.
you were one of the survivors for that as well. You've been a survivor your whole life, but it started back then.
Yeah, I guess it did. And I didn't even realize it, really.
Mm. Is that when your parents, now, were you in the care of your parents when you were hospitalized and infected?
Correct. I was. My grandma actually went to pick me up from the hospital to bring me back home. And it was during her way to the house, she realized something's wrong with his leg. So they took me home. Then they took me back to the hospital to question the doctor. He refused to answer or even communicate to explain anything.
Mm.
But other people have had this issue, obviously, around that time, because there was another woman who overheard the conversation, and she told them, take him to see get to Marmatia. There was medical doctors there that can help me. So they took me there, but once they took me there, they never did come back. So it's rocking of the children is where I believe I was put, and they hold you there up until 3 years old. After that, a medical doctor will come and evaluate you to determine, okay, this one's pretty normal. He's going to go to a good place where he can be educated and still have freedom. This one's disabled, so obviously he's going to go to a retarded, handicapped orphanage, and he's just going to be left there. So that's how they determined which orphanage or hospital you would end up in.
Wow. So your grandma just took you there and you never ended up going back home.
Correct.
Okay. So then when you saw your parents, you said you were having the heavy breathing and you were very nervous about that, which I can imagine. What was that like for you?
I think the most thing that worried me is, would they be angry for the questions I asked? In a way, I don't know. I just felt overwhelmed. Communicating, asking all the questions, learning the history of why things happened the way they did.
Mhm.
But during that trip, no, actually, no, way before that trip, one of the things that I learned in homeschooling through my adoptive parent was forgiveness. And I had already forgiven them way before I even met them again in 2001. But my thing is that if I had not forgiven them and let the whole thing go, I think that my response for my questions to them and their response would have infuriated me, and I would have probably hated them. But I couldn't, and I didn't. I actually understood they were really poor. Education, they probably did not have an education, and you could tell it by communication. And that never bothered me. But because I had learned to forgive and understand why things happen, I ended up being grateful that they did for me in the orphanage, and everything that I went through in the orphanage was absolutely worth it. Because in the end, in the long run, you do something useful with your life out of that. You can help others and you can teach others how to overcome those.
Yeah, that's truly brilliant. I mean, my podcast is called Broken and Brilliant, and it's looking at people who have been broken through some way in their life, something that's happened to them, or many things that have happened to them. And then how do they make something brilliant out of that? And for you, the key was forgiveness. How do you forgive when it's something so severe, when it's something so hurtful? How did your parents teach you? What did you learn about that? What was the process like for you to forgive?
Actually, it was quite simple once I learned it. In the Bible, I read a passage. If you can't forgive those who have done wrong against you, God cannot forgive you for the things you've done wrong against God. And I thought, well, geez, if that's the case, then I better learn really quick, because I don't want to be doomed and be left out for that purpose. But when you forgive something that's happened to your life and you're really trying to pursue a godly life, I'm not saying I'm godly because I'm far from it, but I didn't want to be accounted that I wasn't going to make it in heaven because I wasn't going to forgive and I was going to allow the past to affect me. But when I learned to forgive, and I actually did forgive, I actually felt a heavy burden off my shoulder. And so that was a miracle because I felt it instantly. And when I forgave the workers, it was no longer me looking at some of them like with hate or anger. I looked at all of them, whether they were good or bad, like they were part of my family still. So
That's fantastic. Yeah. I mean, you know, I work with a lot of people who are grieving over heavy, heavy things. And that's part of it, is getting to that place of forgiveness. And sometimes I have had people that are just hanging on so hard because they don't feel like they can do it. It's so, forgiveness is really a very simple thing. It's just speaking it and letting it go. But it's not easy. It's simple, but it's not easy.
it's not easy and it's not simple. That's absolutely true. But at the same time, if you can't forgive and let it go, you're wanting to live with them. I'm not saying that everybody's like that, but that's what it boils down to. If you're living with it 5, 10 years down the road and you can't forgive, you're holding on to it because you really like that kind of life, or you just really don't want to move forward.
Yeah.
But in reality, I feel that if you want to move forward in life, there's some things you just have to let go and you can't dwell on them.
Yeah.
I can't dwell on my past to let it affect me. There's so many things I have to do in life and accomplish that I don't have time to look
That's
him
right.
and be epitome, for example, of what I went through. I want to talk about it to ensure this doesn't happen again. I've done
Yes.
public speaking for the 20 years, raising awareness on this. And two of my friends that were left behind in Romanian orphanages are the ones that really got me started on this when I saw them in 2001. And since then, I've spoken in Hades, Romania, all over the US. And I think it's helped a lot of adoptees and adoptive parents understand why children went through what they went through in the family environment, and why families can't understand children, and why adoptees can't understand their family. A lot of times is they're not used to it, they're not comfortable to talk about it, but at the same time, there's a barrier of communication gap. And that's what comes to the most is one side of the family is really scared that you're going to hurt the feelings. The adoptee does not know how you're going to react. And because some parents responded harshly, like, I'm your parent, don't talk about it anymore, you're no longer from there, and seal it. Well, that's going to make them isolated, and it's going to hide things, and they're going to feel very uncomfortable living in a family environment because now they know your true side.
That's so good. So what advice do you have for adoptive parents?
I think my best advice is don't spoil your children, your adopted children, from the other children that you naturally have. It shows favoritism, number one, and you have to treat them both equally and let them express what they have to tell you. You may not like it, it might be hurtful, but in the end, you being there for them and listening and guiding them through the journey of growing and developing as they become adults, they will have a better understanding of compassion, love, and doing things for people that they never imagined to do because of how you communicated and how you responded with that child through the struggle.
So even though you and your parents went through this struggle, especially when you were a teenager and when you left at 17, you've worked through those things. Is that correct? Where are you guys at in your relationship these days?
We're still strong. I don't see them as much or have talked to them as much because we live in different states now. And they both work. I work. Obviously, 16-hour shifts a day is really hard to communicate with anyone these days. My struggle of all challenging part of it was going to Romania in 2001. There was an eye-opening of that. If I would have been left behind, my option would have been on the street in an old folks home, begging on the street, or absolutely dead. But the patience and the endurance that my parents actually showed me is what taught me later on to be a humble person and try to understand life itself. I learned through my sisters, don't be ever judgmental, regardless the circumstances. I try to understand every aspect of everyone's life without being judgmental, and I try the best to understand to help them.
So a lot of that revelation came to you after you went back to Romania and kind of were at a developmental age where you could understand and you could comprehend, if I would have stayed, if they would have not adopted me, this is what my future would have been. And that really shifted some things inside you, it sounds like. Is that accurate?
It is accurate, yeah.
Mm.
I think most adopted children, regardless what country they're adopted from, their biggest thing is when they become teenager, I'm curious to find my birth family. I want to know what happened. But in reality, Carrie, it's sometimes you're better off not knowing the truth.
Mm.
Because the truth sometimes will be more than what you bargained for. And sometimes we are better off not knowing what really happened in the past.
Yeah.
I've worked in adoption cases in Romania with the TV show for a year and a half. And some of the adoption stories of reunions that I worked with, I learned a lot from working with journalists. And at the end of my contract, I really stopped doing reunions because I realized it wasn't beneficiary for neither side.
Really?
I think most of the adoptees were more hurt in the long run than the birth families. So.
Yeah, and you definitely have a heart for the adoptees, and they've already been through enough. You don't want to add on to that hurt, so I can understand that. So I know you continue to go back to Romania. What work are you doing? In fact, you were saying to me before we came on that you're working 2 jobs right now, working 16 hours a day because you want to go back to Romania this summer. What do you do when you go back to Romania?
Well, Carrie, last year, production team, and I traveled to Romania to shoot a short film. And currently it's titled Izidor, hoping it will be out this September or October. We did a whole month of filming for the short film. I met an organization and we had talked for a couple of months. The organization is called We Are Their Voice. And I've spent 2 full weeks with them communicating and meetings. And through that, I joined Alliance with them. And I cannot say, most times I create partnership to help create funds for a project that we work on that has to do with Romania. But in this particular case, I've never been so happy and so proud to actually represent an organization that I actually really love being part of. This is the first time I've ever been so happy to join. The newest thing is the autobiography that you showed earlier is no longer available.
Oh, okay.
The autobiography, you're the first one to know about this, so now the public's gonna know too. We've updated the autobiography. There are so many errors and typos in the first one. So we've did this summer it'll be 20 years that the book was written.
Really?
What are the odds that you find out most authors, when they 20-year hits, they usually do update on their autobiographies and switch things around.
Well, I might have to start pulling mine out again, huh?
You might just, but we're adding probably a couple of new chapters, probably 100 to 200 new pages that will be added at the end from 2005 to present current time.
Yeah.
So I'm really excited about that. And I'm working with We Are Their Voices.
Tell us a little bit about that organization. What do they do?
We Are Their Voices is started by Viorica Opreș in the heartland of Sighetu Marmatia, my homeland where I grew up. So their main work is to help the elderly who are left abandoned, neglected in home to where they can't move, they can't even cook. And in most cases that they found them in, the house have been so trashed, you can barely walk in because they can no longer take care of themselves. So one of the first things they do is they bring them to the center, they shave their heads, and then they give them brand new clothes, and then they give them a settlement to be comfortable, and then they stay there, they become residents. But these are actually elderly that nobody visits, and most of their children or relatives are working abroad because of trying to make a better living for their family. We also take in homeless, drug addicts, alcohol. Those are emergency shelters And sometimes the social worker will call on cases where they have nobody that will take these people in. So the organization is asked to see if they can take them in.
Wow.
So I always wanted to do is take people that are in need of help, homeless, drug addicts, alcoholics. And the way the foundation does it is incredible. You can't do none of those while you're there. But also, most people that come through are medically evaluated by medical
Right.
doctors
Mhm.
to determine what medications you need to be on, if you need medications, and what medical help is needed. And then they get you all the necessary help that is needed. And the best thing is, most homeless in Romania or elderly lose their paperwork and their identities. So once they're settled in, the foundation actually helps them restore their identity
Oh,
and
wow.
helps find work, employment. And there are companies that work to where they will help employ them. Um, there's a guy that was on 2020 94. His name was Marin. He's the one that captivated America into responding for 2020 to go back and bring him back.
Mm.
Well, John Upton did bring him, and he returned to Romania about 6 years later. But because his legal wasn't documented, he's been stuck in Romania since almost 2000.
Mhm.
He was homeless for about a year or two. And I went there and I saw him and I couldn't convince him to stay with the organization. But the organization knew we could not force him to come in. So they let him come when he wanted. And finally, this winter, it was so cold, he couldn't handle it. So he came and stayed with them. And
Mm.
now he's scared to go in the general public. He's scared to go anywhere because he's been mocked, made fun of, and bullied on the streets everywhere he's been going. And now he's living a simple life under their care. So
Wow. They truly
um,
are saving people's lives. These are people that have no one.
absolutely correct. And the thing is they don't have the necessary funds to be able to provide everything, which I help them in the best way I can on that end, but I'm also doing fundraisings as well. But most of the things that they have to pay for, because it's not a big, well-known organization or even a rich one, they pay out of their pocket. And sometimes there are people kind-hearted in the Sighetu Marmație that will donate food. Sometimes they're lucky and they get money, and so they'll donate a couple of thousand to them for the foundation. But food, clothing, they have a pretty good resource of that. But to be able to keep the organization going, rental, utilities, all those become very consuming.
Right.
So my biggest thing is I want to make sure that we keep that going for them and that we can get them a new facility that is under the organization's name instead of
Wow.
renting from someone and being controlled. Okay, now I'm selling it. Now you can't stay here. But if they own the organization under their name, a center, a facility, then they're secure.
Wow. Yeah, that's brilliant, truly. Um, Izidor, I just want to thank you so much for joining me. And I want to know if people who are watching want to get a hold of you or want to be able to donate, do you have contact information that we can put on the website or on the podcast as well?
Yeah, I have two Facebook pages, one a public figure one. I'm harder to get hold of on that one because I don't check it as often. I'm sorry.
Right.
I do have another one that's personal. It's Izidor Ruckel. And I also have a website. It's called IzidorRuckel.com.
.com.
Yep. And then on my Facebook page, you can find the organization's information. It'll be the first thing you'll see when you go to my Facebook page. And hopefully before this comes out, we'll have their website linked onto my website. But if not, you can find more information about the organization. If you have any questions or would love to donate, please feel free to contact me and I will make sure that you're guided in the right direction.
That's just so fantastic. You know, Izidor, I've loved your story since we met those years ago. I remember we met at a coffee shop out near Denver International Airport, and we
Starbucks.
traded, yeah, and we traded books and kept in touch. And then when our film came out, you actually came to the premiere for it at that movie theater. So we've kind of kept in touch through the years, but it's been a while since we've caught up. And I've kind of been following you through Facebook and some of your travels and getting to see what you've been doing. But I just thought it would be really great to have a conversation and catch up a little bit. So I know how busy you are. I want to let you go so you can get back to work. I know you took some time off for this today. Is there anything else you want to share with us before we say goodbye?
Well, I wanted to thank you for those of you that have been listening. And I know most of you are going to see the website. If you go to my website, you'll find the old autobiography. It's no longer available for you to purchase it, but rest assured, the new book will be available between August or September. And we will do promotional, and I will start advertising a couple of months before. And then please follow us on Facebook for the new short film coming out. And if you want to know more about it, find us on Facebook, contact us. And we have Izidor Story Facebook. That's the film story Facebook page.
That's awesome. Wow. Well, thank you so much, Izidor. We so appreciate you, and I support you in all of your work, and just love that you've been willing to take this time with us today. So thank you so much.
No problem. Thank you for having me, and we'll be in touch. Thank you so much again.
Bye-bye.